I have sat on this bench for 42 years. I have watched the wealthy walk into my courtroom like they own the air itself. I have watched the children of powerful people use their family name as a get-out-of-jail-free card. I have seen entitlement in every form it takes, arrogance in every shade it comes in, and privilege wielded like a weapon against people who have nothing left to lose. But what walked into my courtroom on the morning of December 3rd at exactly 9:45 a.m. was something that made my blood run cold even before I heard a single word of testimony. A 28-year-old man who stood in the center of City Hall Plaza in front of 40 witnesses and a dozen security cameras looked down at a 54-year-old homeless veteran sitting quietly on a bench and poured a full cup of hot coffee over that man's head while laughing loud enough for the entire plaza to hear. And then, when that veteran stood up, shaking and soaked, this 28-year-old man shoved him so hard he fell backward onto the concrete and didn't get up on his own. And somewhere in the back of that courtroom, sitting in a plain gray suit with no mayoral seal, no security detail, no indication of who he was, sat his father. A man who had served this city for 12 years, a man whose campaign slogan was integrity first, a man who built his entire political career on the promise that he would never let power protect the guilty. And what that father did when I called him to the stand made the entire courtroom go completely silent. Some people gasped, some people cried, and at least 3 reporters ran out of the room to file the story before I even finished reading the sentence. If you think you know how this ends, trust me, you don't. Hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is going to change the way you think about power, about service, about what it means to be homeless in a country that once promised to take care of the people who fought for it, and what real accountability looks like when a father has to choose between protecting his son and protecting his soul. This is Trial Sphere, and this is the story of how a military record that had been buried for 15 years became the most powerful piece of evidence I've ever read from this bench. Let's begin. Hanengravers. The case file that landed on my desk that morning was thicker than it should have been for a simple assault charge. My clerk, Patricia, who has worked with me for 19 years and knows exactly which cases are going to ruin my week, handed it to me with a sticky note on top that read, "Judge, you're going to want to read the victim's background before court starts." I read it twice. Then I read it a third time because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. State of Massachusetts versus Tyler James Brennan, case number 2024 CR 8841, assault and battery, destruction of property, disorderly conduct, public humiliation with intent to cause emotional distress, which is a specific charge in our state code for crimes that go beyond physical harm and deliberately seek to degrade another human being in a public forum. The defendant was Tyler James Brennan, age 28, occupation, Director of Community Outreach for the Brennan Foundation, a nonprofit run by his family that claimed to support veterans, the homeless, and at-risk youth. Annual salary, $240,000 for a job that, according to tax records subpoenaed by the district attorney, involved approximately 6 hours of work per week. He drove a Range Rover. He lived in a penthouse condominium in the newly developed waterfront district that his father had personally helped rezone. He wore custom suits and a watch that cost more than most people in this city make in half a year. The victim was Robert Andrew Chen. Age 54, occupation, according to the intake form, none. Housing status, unhoused. Listed address, City Shelter Network, bed 17 when available, otherwise Memorial Park, Northwest Bench near the fountain. But that's not what Patricia's note was about. That's not what made me read this file 3 times. Robert Chen was a veteran, not just a veteran, a decorated combat veteran. 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 tour in Iraq. Staff Sergeant, United States Army, 75th Ranger Regiment, honorable discharge in 2009. And clipped to the back of his intake file, in a plastic sleeve like someone had been carrying it around for years and wanted to keep it safe, was a photocopy of a commendation signed by a general whose name I recognized from the news. I'll come back to that commendation, because when I read it out loud in court, it changed everything. But first, let me tell you about Robert Chen before I tell you what happened to him on the morning of November 29th in City Hall Plaza. Because in cases like this, it matters who the victim is, not because some victims deserve more justice than others. Every human being who walks into this courtroom, no matter who they are or where they come from, deserves equal protection under the law. That is not negotiable. That is the foundation everything else is built on. But because the full weight of what was done to Robert Chen cannot be understood without understanding the man he was before the war, the man he became because of the war, and the man he was trying so hard to be on the morning Tyler Brennan decided to humiliate him in front of half the city. Robert Andrew Chen was born in 1970 in Quincy, Massachusetts, to parents who had immigrated from Taiwan in 1968 with $200 and a single suitcase. His father worked as a line cook. His mother cleaned office buildings at night. Robert was their only child, and they poured everything they had into making sure he had a future. He graduated high school in 1988 with a 3.8 GPA. He had a full scholarship to UMass Boston to study engineering, but in the summer before his freshman year, his father had a stroke. The medical bills buried the family. Robert gave up the scholarship, got a job at a construction company, and took care of his parents for 3 years while he watched his friends go to college, start careers, build the lives he'd been told he could have if he just worked hard enough. In 1991, his father passed away. In 1992, his mother followed. Robert was 22 years old, alone, grieving, and he did what a lot of young men in his position have done when they don't know what else to do with the weight they're carrying. He enlisted. He joined the Army in 1993. He went to basic training at Fort Benning. He was fast, disciplined, smart. His drill sergeant wrote in his file, "This soldier has the kind of quiet leadership that doesn't need to shout. Men follow him because they trust him. Recommend for advanced training." Robert qualified for Ranger School. He passed. In 1995, he became a member of the 75th Ranger Regiment, one of the most elite light infantry units in the United States military. If you don't know what that means, let me put it simply. Rangers are sent into the worst situations in the worst places, and they're expected to complete the mission no matter what the cost. Robert served with honor for 16 years. He deployed to Afghanistan twice, in 2002 and 2004. He deployed to Iraq in 2006. He did things in those places that he would never talk about, not because he was ashamed, but because the people who do the hardest things in war are often the ones who speak about it the least. He earned the Combat Infantryman badge. He earned the Ranger tab. He earned the respect of every man who served beside him, and on March 14, 2007, in a village outside Ramadi, Iraq, Staff Sergeant Robert Chen did something that earned him the Bronze Star with Valor. His unit was ambushed during a patrol. They were pinned down by machine gun fire from 3 directions. 2 soldiers were hit in the initial burst. They were bleeding out in the middle of the street, 40 meters from cover, and every second they stayed there was a second closer to death. Robert Chen didn't wait for orders. He didn't wait for air support. He ran into the open street under active fire, threw one soldier over his shoulder, dragged the other by his vest, and carried both of them back to cover while bullets tore up the ground at his feet. Then he picked up his rifle, returned fire, and held that position until medevac arrived. Both soldiers survived. One of them wrote a letter to Robert's commanding officer that's still in his file. It says, "SSG Chen is the reason I got to meet my daughter. He is the reason I'm alive. I owe him everything." Robert Chen came home in 2009. Honorable discharge, 16 years of service. A record that most soldiers would be proud to hang on their wall for the rest of their lives. But Robert didn't have a wall because when he came home to a country that didn't know what to do with him. He came home with PTSD that woke him up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, thinking he was back in Ramadi. He came home with a traumatic brain injury from an IED blast that gave him headaches so severe he couldn't hold down a job that required him to look at a computer screen for more than an hour. He came home to a VA system that was overwhelmed, underfunded, and couldn't get him an appointment with a psychiatrist for 6 months. He tried. God, he tried. He worked construction for a while, but the noise of the machinery triggered him. He worked night shifts at a warehouse, but the isolation made the nightmares worse. He couldn't keep an apartment because he couldn't keep a job long enough to make rent. He stayed with friends until the friends got tired of finding him sitting in the dark at 4 a.m., staring at nothing. By 2012, Robert Chen was homeless, not because he was lazy, not because he didn't try, but because this country has a long and shameful history of sending men and women to war and then forgetting about them the moment they come home and need help. Robert lived on the streets for 12 years. He stayed clean, stayed sober, stayed out of trouble. He slept in shelters when there was room. He slept on benches in Memorial Park when there wasn't. He kept his military commendations in a plastic bag in his backpack because they were the only proof he had that his life had meant something once. Every Tuesday, he went to the VA clinic for his medications. Every Thursday, he volunteered at a soup kitchen on the South Side, serving food to people who were in the same situation he was. Because even with nothing, Robert Chen still believed in service. He had a routine, a corner of the world that was his. Every morning at 8 a.m., he would sit on the northwest bench in City Hall Plaza near the fountain. He would drink the free coffee the church group handed out. He would read the newspaper that someone left behind. He would watch people walk past him on their way to work, to meetings, to lives that had room in them for things like plans and futures. He didn't bother anyone. He didn't ask for money. He just sat there, quietly, trying to get through another day. And on the morning of November 29th, Tyler Brennan walked past that bench, saw a homeless man sitting there, and decided to make him the punchline of a joke. Hungry Brew. November 29th was a Thursday. It was cold, the kind of cold that gets into your bones when you don't have a warm place to go. Robert Chen was sitting on his usual bench in City Hall Plaza, wearing 3 layers of clothing that he'd gotten from the shelter donation bin, holding a cup of coffee in both hands to keep them warm. The plaza was busy. Morning commuters, city workers, people on their way to the municipal offices to pay parking tickets, file permits, attend meetings. Security cameras on every corner. At least 40 people within sight of that bench. Tyler Brennan was there for a meeting. He was scheduled to attend a city council session at 10 a.m. to present a grant proposal for the Brennan Foundation, which again was the non-profit that claimed to support veterans and the homeless. The irony of that will not be lost on you in a moment. Tyler came out of a coffee shop across the street at approximately 8:47 a.m. He was with 2 friends, both of them in their late 20s, both of them dressed like they'd never missed a meal or a paycheck in their lives. They were laughing loud, the kind of laughter that comes from people who think the world exists to entertain them. According to witnesses, Tyler was holding a large cup of coffee. He was talking on his phone. He was walking toward the City Hall entrance, and then he saw Robert. Here's what one witness, a woman named Angela Morris, who works in the clerk's office, said in her statement. "I saw the mayor's son stop in the middle of the sidewalk. He looked at the homeless man on the bench, and he said something to his friends. They all started laughing. Then he walked right up to the bench, and I thought maybe he was going to give the man some money or something. But instead, he just stood there for a second, and then he poured his entire coffee over the man's head." Another witness, a city maintenance worker named Carlos Fuentes, said, "The coffee was hot. You could see the steam. The man on the bench, he jerked back, and he tried to stand up, and the mayor's son just started laughing like it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. He said, 'Maybe that'll wake you up, buddy. You're making the plaza look like a dump.'" Robert Chen stood up. He was soaked. Coffee was dripping down his face, his neck, soaking into the only winter coat he owned. His hands were shaking, and not just from the cold. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. According to every single witness, he just looked at Tyler Brennan and said, very quietly, "Why would you do that?" Tyler's response, captured on security footage with audio, was this: "Because you're sitting on city property like you own it. And someone needs to remind you that people like you don't belong here. This plaza is for people who actually contribute to society." Robert said, "I served this country for 16 years. Tyler laughed, out loud, in front of 40 people, and then he said, "Yeah, sure you did, buddy, and I'm the Queen of England." Robert reached into his backpack. He pulled out the plastic sleeve with his discharge papers and his commendations. He held them out and he said, "I'm a veteran. I'm a ranger. I fought so people like you could stand here and say things like that." Tyler Brennan looked at the papers. He didn't read them, he didn't touch them. He slapped them out of Robert's hand and they scattered across the concrete. And then he shoved Robert, both hands to the chest, hard enough that a 54-year-old man who hadn't had a solid meal in 2 days, and who weighed maybe 160 pounds went down like he'd been hit by a truck. Robert hit the concrete. His head bounced once. He tried to get up, but his legs wouldn't work right. He just lay there, on the ground, surrounded by his military records, while Tyler Brennan stepped over him and walked into City Hall like nothing had happened. Angela Morris called 911. Carlos Fuentes ran to Robert and helped him sit up. Another witness, a college student named Maya Patel, gathered up Robert's papers and put them back in the plastic sleeve and handed them to him while he was still sitting on the ground, trying to figure out if he was seriously hurt. The paramedics arrived. Robert refused to go to the hospital because he didn't have insurance and he knew what an ER bill would do to someone with no income. But the paramedics documented the injury anyway. Contusion to the back of the head, possible concussion, bruising to his upper back from the fall. The police arrived. They took statements from 7 witnesses. They reviewed the security footage. And then they went into City Hall, found Tyler Brennan sitting in the council chamber with his legs crossed and his phone in his hand, and they arrested him in front of 14 city council members, his father's chief of staff, and a reporter from the Boston Globe. Tyler's first words when they put the handcuffs on him were, "Do you know who my father is?" The officer who arrested him, a 19-year veteran of the force named Lieutenant Grace Hawkins, said, "Yes, sir, I do. That's why I'm reading you your rights very, very carefully." Now, before I tell you what Tyler Brennan looked like when he walked into my courtroom 3 weeks later, before I tell you what he said when he opened his mouth and realized that his name wasn't going to save him this time, I want you to do something. Drop a comment right now and tell me, have you ever witnessed someone treat a homeless person like they were less than human? Have you ever seen someone use their family's name to escape accountability for something they did in broad daylight in front of witnesses? Tell me, because what you're about to see is the answer to that question. And I promise you, it's not what you expect. And while you're down there, subscribe to Trial Sphere. Less than 4% of the people watching this video are subscribed. If you believe that service should be honored, that veterans deserve our respect no matter where they sleep at night, and that privilege should never be a shield from justice, hit that subscribe button right now. You are going to want to see what happens when I read Robert Chen's full military record out loud in that courtroom. Because when Tyler Brennan's father heard what his son had done to a Bronze Star recipient, the look on that man's face was something I'll remember for the rest of my life. Let's go back into that courtroom. Horngrowers. Tyler Brennan walked into my courtroom on December 3rd, like he was doing us all a favor by showing up, expensive charcoal suit, tailored to fit like it was painted on, a silk tie that probably cost $300, a watch that caught the light every time he moved his wrist, which he did often, like he wanted to make sure everyone noticed. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His hair was perfect. He looked like a man who had never been uncomfortable a single day in his life. His attorney walked beside him. I knew the lawyer, Marcus Webb, one of the best defense attorneys in the state, the kind of lawyer you hire when you have unlimited money and you want to make a case disappear through sheer legal attrition. Marcus was carrying a leather briefcase that looked heavy enough to contain motions, counter-motions, affidavits, character witnesses, and every procedural delay tactic he could think of. Tyler didn't look nervous. He looked mildly annoyed, the way someone looks when they've been pulled into a meeting that they think is beneath them. He glanced around the courtroom like he was assessing the furniture. He didn't look at the gallery where at least 15 veterans advocates were sitting in the back rows, all of them wearing jackets with military insignia, all of them staring at him like they wanted to see what accountability looked like up close. And he didn't look at Robert Chen. Robert was sitting in the front row of the gallery. wearing clean clothes that someone from the VA had given him for court. He had a bandage on the back of his head where it had hit the concrete. His hands were folded in his lap. His Purple Heart was pinned to his jacket, right above his heart, and Tyler Brennan, the man who had poured hot coffee on him and called him a liar, couldn't even look in his direction. That told me everything I needed to know. I called the case. State of Massachusetts versus Tyler James Brennan, case number 2024 CR 8841. Charges: assault and battery, destruction of property, disorderly conduct, and public humiliation with intent to cause emotional distress. Mr. Brennan, how do you plead? Marcus Webb stood immediately. Not guilty on all counts, Your Honor. We believe the charges are exaggerated, the witness testimony is unreliable, and the prosecution's characterization of my client's actions is not supported by the evidence. I looked directly at Tyler. Mr. Brennan, do you have a voice, or is your attorney going to answer every question for you? Tyler looked at me like I'd just asked him to recite the alphabet backward. Then he said, voice flat, "Not guilty," I said. Now let's talk about what happened on November 29th in City Hall Plaza in front of 40 witnesses and multiple security cameras. The assistant district attorney, a sharp young woman named Jennifer Ortiz, who had personally taken this case because she was tired of watching powerful people dodge consequences, stood and walked the court through the evidence. She presented the 911 call logs, Angela Morris's voice shaking with anger, saying, "Someone just assaulted a homeless man in the plaza. He poured coffee on him and knocked him down. Yes, I saw the whole thing. The guy who did it just walked into City Hall like nothing happened." She presented the witness statements. 7 people, all independent, all saying the same thing. Tyler Brennan deliberately humiliated Robert Chen, mocked his military service, destroyed his personal property, and then committed battery that left him injured on the ground. She presented the paramedic report documenting Robert's injuries, and then she played the security footage. The courtroom went silent, the screen lit up with a wide-angle shot of City Hall Plaza. Timestamp, November 29th, 8:47 a.m., crystal clear, full color, high definition. We watched Tyler Brennan exit the coffee shop. We watched him stop, point at Robert, say something to his friends that made them laugh. We watched him walk directly to the bench with a cup of coffee in his hand. We watched him pour it over Robert Chen's head. We watched Robert stand up, shaking, asking a question we couldn't hear on the audio, but that witnesses had already confirmed. Why would you do that? We watched Tyler laugh. We watched him knock the military papers out of Robert's hands. We watched him shove a 54-year-old man so hard he went down on the concrete and didn't get back up on his own. And then we watched Tyler Brennan step over Robert's body and walk into City Hall. The footage ended. The courtroom was silent for 5 full seconds. Someone in the gallery, one of the veterans in the back row, said quietly, "Jesus Christ." I removed my glasses. Anyone who's been in my courtroom before knows what that means. "Mr. Brennan," I said, voice very calm, very measured, "would you like to reconsider your plea?" Marcus Webb put a hand on Tyler's arm. Tyler pulled it away. "Your Honor," Tyler said, and his voice had an edge to it now. The kind of edge that comes from someone who's used to getting their way and doesn't like being questioned. That video doesn't show the full context. That man was harassing people in the plaza. I was trying to get him to move along. He got aggressive, and I defended myself. The gallery exhaled in a way that sounded like a collective growl. Jennifer Ortiz stood up. "Your Honor, there is no evidence anywhere in the record that Mr. Chen was harassing anyone. 7 witnesses say he was sitting quietly on a bench. The security footage shows he didn't move until after your client poured coffee on him." I looked at Tyler. "Mr. Brennan, I just watched you on video pour hot coffee over a man's head, laugh about it, and then knock him to the ground. That is not self-defense. That is assault. That is battery. And frankly, that is cruelty." Tyler's jaw tightened. He glanced at his attorney, then back at me. "Your Honor, I think there's been a misunderstanding. My father has served this city." I held up one hand. "Stop. Stop right there. If the next words out of your mouth are anything about your father's position, your family's reputation, or any attempt to suggest that your last name should affect how I apply the law in this courtroom, I strongly suggest you reconsider." Tyler stared at me, and then he said it anyway. My father is the mayor of this city. He's built his career on helping people like that man. The Brennan Foundation has donated millions to veteran causes. I think it's worth noting that my family has done more for homeless veterans than almost anyone in this state. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. I leaned forward. Mr. Brennan, do you know who Robert Chen is? Tyler glanced at Robert for the first time since he'd walked into the courtroom. A quick, dismissive look. A homeless man who was trespassing on city property. I stood up from the bench. I walked down to the front of the courtroom. This is something I almost never do, but I needed Tyler Brennan to understand exactly what kind of man he had humiliated. Mr. Chen, I said, would you please stand? Robert stood slowly. He was nervous. You could see it in the way his hands shook slightly, the way he kept his eyes down like he didn't want to be the center of attention. Mr. Chen, I said gently, would you please tell this court who you are and what you did for this country? Robert's voice was quiet, but it carried. My name is Robert Andrew Chen. I served in the United States Army for 16 years. I was a staff sergeant with the 75th Ranger Regiment. I deployed to Afghanistan twice and Iraq once. I received an honorable discharge in 2009. He paused. His voice got even quieter. I've been homeless for 12 years. I have PTSD and a brain injury from my service. I'm trying. I'm still trying. But it's hard. The courtroom was absolutely still. I turned to Tyler Brennan. Do you understand what you just heard? You poured coffee on a decorated combat veteran, a man who served this country for 16 years, a ranger. Do you know what rangers do, Mr. Brennan? Tyler said nothing. They go into the worst places on earth and do the hardest jobs so that people like you can stand in City Hall Plaza and feel safe. And you looked at that man, a man who sacrificed more than you will ever understand, and you treated him like garbage. Tyler's face was red now. His attorney was whispering urgently in his ear, but Tyler was barely listening. Your Honor, Tyler said, voice tight. I didn't know he was a veteran. Would it have mattered? I asked. Silence. Would it have mattered, Mr. Brennan, if he wasn't a veteran? If he was just a homeless man trying to get through the day? Would that have made it acceptable? More silence. Let me be very clear, I said. Every human being in this city, housed or unhoused, veteran or civilian, deserves to be treated with basic human dignity. The fact that you think your ignorance of Mr. Chen's service is some kind of excuse tells me exactly how much work we have to do here. And then I did something that changed the entire trajectory of this case. I picked up the file on my desk. I opened it to the page Patricia had marked for me. Your Honor, Marcus Webb said quickly, if we could take a brief recess to discuss. No, I said, we're going to do this right now, because I'm going to read something into the record and I want your client to hear every single word. I held up the document. This, I said, is a commendation from the United States Army. It was signed by Major General William Hackett on behalf of the Department of Defense. It is addressed to Staff Sergeant Robert Andrew Chen, and I am going to read it in its entirety. The courtroom was silent. I began. On March 14, 2007, Staff Sergeant Robert A. Chen distinguished himself by exceptionally valorous actions while serving as a team leader with the 75th Ranger Regiment during combat operations in Ramadi, Iraq. SSG Chen's unit was conducting a dismounted patrol in a hostile urban environment when they were ambushed by enemy forces employing small arms fire and rocket-propelled grenades from multiple concealed positions. The initial volley of fire struck two members of SSG Chen's team, leaving them gravely wounded and exposed in an open street approximately 40 meters from cover, without regard for his own safety. And with complete disregard for the intense enemy fire impacting around him, SSG Chen immediately moved into the open to retrieve his fallen comrades. He carried the first soldier, who had sustained a gunshot wound to the abdomen, over his shoulder while simultaneously dragging the second soldier, who had been hit in the leg and was unable to walk, by his load-bearing vest. While moving under fire, SSG Chen was struck by shrapnel from a near-miss RPG impact, sustaining minor wounds to his left arm and shoulder. He did not stop. He carried both soldiers to cover. administered first aid, and then returned to his position and provided suppressive fire that allowed the rest of his unit to maneuver and neutralize the enemy threat. Both wounded soldiers survived and were evacuated to medical facilities where they made full recoveries. Their survival is directly attributable to SSG Chen's immediate and decisive action. SSG Chen's gallantry, intrepidity, and dedication to his fellow soldiers reflect great credit upon himself, the 75th Ranger Regiment, and the United States Army. For his actions on this day, SSG Chen is hereby awarded the Bronze Star Medal with V device for valor. I looked up from the page. The courtroom was silent. Several of the veterans in the gallery were crying. One of them, an older man with a Vietnam War cap, was standing with his hand over his heart. I looked at Tyler Brennan. "Mr. Brennan, do you understand what I just read to you?" Robert Chen ran into enemy fire. He was shot at. He was hit by shrapnel. And he didn't stop until he had carried 2 wounded soldiers to safety. He saved their lives. Tyler's face had gone pale. I wasn't done. "There's more in this file," I said. "Do you want me to keep reading? Or do you understand now what kind of man you humiliated in front of 40 people? Tyler said nothing. I kept reading. After his discharge in 2009, Robert Chen struggled with PTSD and traumatic brain injury. He sought treatment at the VA, but due to systemic delays and underfunding, he was unable to access consistent psychiatric care. He lost his housing. He lost his employment. He has been unhoused since 2012. I set the file down. "Mr. Brennan, your family foundation claims to support homeless veterans. How much money has the Brennan Foundation actually given to direct veterans services in the past 5 years? Marcus Webb stood. "Your Honor, I don't see how." "Sit down, counselor. I'm asking your client a direct question relevant to his character and his understanding of the population he claims his family serves." "Mr. Brennan, how much?" Tyler stammered. I don't handle the financial side. I just do outreach, and you don't know." Silence. Jennifer Ortiz stood. "Your Honor, if I may, the prosecution subpoenaed the Brennan Foundation's tax filings. In the past 5 years, the foundation has raised $14 million in donations. Of that, $11 million went to administrative costs, salaries, and event expenses. Less than $400,000 went to actual veteran services." The gallery erupted. People were shouting. The bailiff had to call for order. I banged the gavel. "Mr. Brennan, you stood in City Hall Plaza and told a homeless veteran that he didn't contribute to society. You mocked his service. You destroyed his military records. You assaulted him. And all the while, you were collecting a $250,000 salary from a foundation that claims to help people exactly like him, but actually spends most of its money on galas and salaries for you and your friends." Tyler looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. "Your Honor," he said, voice shaking now, "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know who he was. And that," I said, "is the problem. You didn't care who he was. He was homeless, so in your mind, he didn't matter. His life didn't matter. His service didn't matter. He was just an inconvenience, something ugly that you wanted to erase from your view." I paused. "Do you know what Robert Chen did after you assaulted him? After the paramedics checked him out, and he refused to go to the hospital because he was afraid of the medical bills. He went to the soup kitchen where he volunteers every Thursday. He served food to 60 people because even after what you did to him, he still believes in service." Tyler had tears in his eyes now. Real tears, not the performance kind. I looked out at the gallery. "Mayor Brennan," I said, "would you please come forward?" The entire room turned. In the back row, a man stood up. He was in his late 50s, gray at the temples, wearing a plain gray suit with no mayoral pin, no flag lapel, nothing that indicated who he was. He looked like a man who had been carrying a heavy weight for 3 weeks and had finally been asked to set it down. Mayor Richard Brennan had been sitting in that courtroom from the very beginning. He'd heard every word. He'd watched the security footage. He'd heard his son lie about what happened. He'd heard the commendation read aloud, and the look on his face when he walked down that center aisle was not anger. It was grief. Tyler turned around. His expression cycled through confusion, relief, and then something close to terror when he saw his father's face. "Dad," Tyler said, "what are you?" Mayor Brennan held up one hand. Tyler stopped talking immediately. "Your Honor, the mayor said, and his voice was steady, but you could hear the cracks in it, the places where he was barely holding himself together. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Mayor Brennan, I want to be clear. You're under no obligation to testify. This is your son. You have every right to remain silent. I know, Your Honor, but I need to say this. I need to say it here, in open court, so there's no confusion about where I stand. He took a breath. My son is wrong. He has always been wrong about what my position means and what kind of protection he thinks it gives him. He turned to look at Tyler. I have been mayor of this city for 12 years. I ran on a platform of integrity. I promised the people who elected me that I would never let power protect the guilty, that I would hold everyone to the same standard, that the law would apply equally no matter who you were or who your father was. His voice cracked slightly. He pulled it back. And 3 weeks ago, my son stood in the plaza outside my office and assaulted a homeless veteran in front of witnesses and cameras. And when he was arrested, the first thing he said was, "Do you know who my father is?" He looked at me. Your Honor, I want to be very clear. My name is not a shield. My position is not a defense. What my son did to Mr. Chen was reprehensible. It was cruel. It was the act of someone who has never been held accountable for anything in his life, and that is my fault. Tyler's face crumpled. Dad, no, listen to me. You need to hear this. Mayor Brennan's voice was firm now, the voice of a man who had made a decision and wasn't going to be moved. I have watched you coast through your entire life on my name. I gave you a job you didn't earn. I gave you money you didn't work for. I gave you access to rooms and people and opportunities that you thought were yours by birthright, and I told myself I was helping you. I told myself I was being a good father. He paused. But a good father teaches his son that actions have consequences. A good father teaches his son that service matters, that sacrifice matters, that the people around you, all of them, not just the ones who look like you or have what you have, deserve respect. He turned to Robert Chen, who was sitting very still in the front row, watching this unfold with an expression of quiet dignity. Mr. Chen, I owe you an apology, not just for what my son did, but for the fact that my foundation, the foundation that claims to serve people like you, has failed so completely. I didn't know the financial breakdown until the DA's office sent me the records. I should have known. That's on me. He looked back at me. Your Honor, I'm here to ask you not to go easy on my son because of who I am. If anything, I'm asking you to hold him to a higher standard. He grew up with every advantage. He has never known hunger or cold or fear. He has never had to wonder where he was going to sleep at night. His voice broke, just for a second. Robert Chen ran into enemy fire to save his brothers. My son poured coffee on him and called him a liar. Those two things should never exist in the same country, let alone the same city. He stopped. He looked at Tyler, and there was so much pain in that look, so much love and disappointment wrapped together. Tyler, I love you. I will always love you. But I will not protect you from the consequences of what you did. Because if I do, you will never become the man I know you can be. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Tyler was crying openly now, not the quiet tears from before. Full, body-shaking sobs. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't understand. I know, Mayor Brennan said quietly, and that's why you need to face this, really face it. He turned back to me. Your Honor, give my son the full weight of what the law allows. Don't reduce it. Don't adjust it. He needs to learn that no one is above accountability. And I need to know that I raised a man who can take responsibility for what he's done. I have been on this bench for 42 years. I have seen fathers beg for leniency. I have seen fathers hire expensive lawyers and pull political strings and do everything in their power to protect their children from the law. But I had never, until that moment, seen a father stand in open court and ask me to be harder on his son because he loved him too much to let him keep being the person he'd become. That is what real love looks like. That is what integrity costs. Henvolra. I asked Robert Chen if he wanted to address the court. He stood slowly. Your Honor, he said, voice quiet but clear, I don't want revenge. I'm not here for that. I just want people to understand that when you see someone on the street, when you see someone who's homeless or struggling, you're looking at a whole person, a person with a history. a person who might have served, a person who might have tried everything they knew how to try and still ended up where they are. He paused. I'm not asking for pity, I'm asking for dignity. That's all any of us want. Just to be treated like we're worth something. He sat down. I turned to Tyler Brennan. Mr. Brennan, stand up. He stood, his attorney stood beside him. Tyler James Brennan, on the charges of assault and battery, destruction of property, disorderly conduct, and public humiliation with intent to cause emotional distress, I find you guilty on all counts. Marcus Webb started to speak. I held up a hand. Your actions on November 29th were not a misunderstanding. They were not a mistake. They were a choice. You chose to humiliate a man because you thought he was powerless. You chose to mock his service because you didn't think it mattered. You chose to assault him because you didn't think there would be consequences. I paused. You were wrong. Tyler was staring at the floor. Look at me, Mr. Brennan. He looked up. Here is what this court orders. You will serve 180 days in the county correctional facility, suspended pending full compliance with the following conditions. First, you will complete 500 hours of community service at the City Veterans Shelter, not the administrative offices, not the fundraising department, the shelter itself. You will serve meals, you will clean bathrooms, you will do laundry, you will sit with veterans and listen to their stories, you will assist with intake, you will do whatever the shelter director tells you to do, and you will do it with respect and humility. Second, you will complete 1 full year of counseling focused on empathy, accountability, and understanding systemic poverty and homelessness. You will attend every session. You will do the work. Third, you will write a formal letter of apology to Robert Chen, which will be read aloud in this courtroom at your 6-month compliance review. Fourth, you will resign from the Brennan Foundation effective immediately. Tyler's head snapped up. Your Honor, I'm not finished. You will resign, and you will recommend to the board that the foundation be audited and restructured to actually serve the populations it claims to serve. If you want to work in veteran services again someday, you will earn that right by doing real work, not by taking a salary for showing up to galas. I looked at Mayor Brennan. Fifth, you will speak to the incoming class at the police academy about privilege, accountability, and what happens when someone believes their family name puts them above the law. Your father will arrange it. Mayor Brennan nodded. And finally, I said, looking back at Tyler, you will make a public apology, not through a lawyer, not through a press release. You will stand in City Hall Plaza on the same spot where you assaulted Robert Chen, and you will apologize to him and to this city. It will be filmed, it will be public, and it will be sincere, or I will revoke your suspended sentence, and you will serve every single day of those 180 days. Tyler was shaking. Do you understand these terms? Yes, Your Honor. Do you accept them? He looked at his father. Mayor Brennan's face was unreadable. Tyler looked at Robert Chen. Robert met his eyes, just for a moment, and there was no anger there, just sadness. Yes, Tyler whispered. I accept, then this court is adjourned. As the bailiff processed the paperwork, I watched Mayor Brennan walk across the courtroom to Robert Chen. He extended his hand. Robert looked at it for a long moment, then he shook it. I'm sorry, the mayor said, and you could hear it in his voice, the weight of it. I'm so sorry for what he did, and I'm sorry for what this city has failed to do for you. Robert nodded slowly. Thank you for what you did today. That wasn't easy. It was the only thing I could do. Tyler stood frozen in place, watching his father shake hands with the man he'd assaulted, watching his father choose justice over him, watching the scaffolding of his entire life come down around him. And for the first time, maybe ever, Tyler Brennan understood what accountability actually meant. 8 months later, I received a letter from Susan Morales, the director of the City Veterans Shelter. She wrote, Your Honor, I am writing to update you on Tyler Brennan's progress. When he first arrived at the shelter, he was resistant. He showed up late. He did the bare minimum. He kept his distance from the residents. He treated the work like a punishment he was enduring, not an opportunity to learn. That lasted about 3 weeks. Then something shifted. I'm not sure what the turning point was. Maybe it was the night he sat with a Vietnam vet named Charlie who was having a flashback. Maybe it was the morning he helped a homeless woman find her VA benefits paperwork and watched her cry with relief when she realized she might qualify for housing assistance. Maybe it was just the accumulated weight of being around people who had nothing but still found ways to help each other. But he started staying late. He started learning names. He started asking questions, real questions, about their service, their struggles, their lives. By month 4, he was coming in on his days off. He started a program to help veterans navigate the VA system. He coordinated with local employers to create job opportunities for shelter residents. By month 6, he asked if he could keep volunteering after his hours were complete. Your Honor, I don't know what you said to this young man in your courtroom, but it worked. He's not the same person who walked in here 8 months ago. Robert Chen also sent me a letter. Your Honor, Tyler came to find me at the shelter 3 months ago. He asked if we could talk. We sat outside on a bench and he apologized. It took him a long time to get through it because he kept stopping to cry. He told me about reading my military record. He told me he hadn't known that homeless people were real people with real histories. He said he'd gone his whole life not seeing people like me. I told him about the war, about what it's like to come home, about how hard it is to explain PTSD to someone who's never had it, about how the system is supposed to help us but sometimes just can't keep up. We've talked a few times since then. He's different now. Quieter, more careful with his words. He listens. I don't know if I've forgiven him completely. That's still hard. But I think he's trying to become someone who deserves forgiveness, and that matters. Thank you for giving him a sentence that could actually change him. A lot of judges would have just thrown him in jail or let him pay a fine. You gave him something harder. The chance to understand what he did. I got housing, by the way. The VA finally came through. I have an apartment. It's small, but it's mine. Tyler helped me move in. He and some other volunteers from the shelter carried my stuff up 3 flights of stairs. I'm doing better, thank you. I read that letter twice. Then I put it in my desk drawer with the other letters that remind me why this job matters. 6 months after sentencing, Tyler stood in City Hall Plaza and gave his public apology. It was filmed, it was broadcast, and it was sincere. He stood on the same spot where he'd poured coffee on Robert Chen, and he said, "My name is Tyler Brennan. 8 months ago, I stood in this plaza, and I assaulted a homeless veteran named Robert Chen. I poured hot coffee on him. I mocked his service. I shoved him to the ground. I did it because I thought homeless people were less than me. I did it because I'd spent my whole life being told I was special, and I believed that meant other people weren't. I was wrong about everything. Robert Chen is a Bronze Star recipient. He ran into enemy fire to save his fellow soldiers. He served this country for 16 years, and when he came home, the country didn't take care of him the way it should have. That's not his failure. That's ours. I've spent the last 8 months working at the veterans' shelter. I've met hundreds of people who served, who sacrificed, who came home to a system that wasn't built to help them. And every single one of them has taught me something about honor, about resilience, about what service actually means. I'm sorry, Mr. Chen. I'm sorry for what I did. I'm sorry it took me 28 years to learn how to see other people as human beings. I'm sorry I had to humiliate you before I understood how much you'd already given. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be better, trying to actually help instead of just pretending to. Trying to see people, that's all I can do, but I'm going to do it. Robert was there. He stood in the crowd and listened, and when it was over, he walked up to Tyler and shook his hand. The photo of that handshake ran on the front page of the Boston Globe. I will never forget the look on Mayor Brennan's face when he walked down that aisle. The way his voice cracked when he asked me to hold his son accountable. The way he chose his principles over his instinct to protect his child. That is the hardest thing a parent can do, and it's the most loving. I will never forget Robert Chen standing in my courtroom with a bandage on his head and a bronze star on his chest, speaking quietly about dignity. And I will never forget that the law, when applied with both firmness and compassion, can do something that revenge never could. It can change someone. Tyler Brennan is not the same person who walked into my courtroom 8 months ago. He still has work to do. He will always have work to do. But he's doing it, and that possibility, that a single moment of real accountability can redirect a life, is why I still believe in this system. My grandfather came to this country with nothing. He worked in factories. He cleaned floors. He used to tell me that the law is the only place where a man with nothing and a man with everything are supposed to stand on equal ground. He believed that I have spent 42 years on this bench trying to make that true. Cases like this one remind me it's possible, that when a father chooses honor over protection, when a veteran stands with dignity instead of anger, when a young man who thought he was untouchable finally sits with the weight of what he's done and decides to become someone different, the law can be what it's supposed to be. That is the lesson, not the dramatic testimony, not the sentence, not even the apology. The lesson is that character is tested in the moments when doing the right thing costs you something. Mayor Brennan's choice cost him. It cost him his relationship with his son, at least for a while. It cost him politically. But he made it anyway. Robert Chen could have demanded the maximum sentence. He could have refused Tyler's apology. But he chose grace. Not because Tyler deserved it, but because Robert understands something most of us don't. That mercy isn't weakness. It's strength. And Tyler had to choose too. He could have fought the sentence. He could have hired more lawyers, filed appeals, dragged it out for years. But he accepted it. And he did the work. Those choices, all three of them, are what made justice possible. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you believe that no one is above the law, not the wealthy, not the connected, not the children of mayors, then hit that like button right now to scoot to Trial Sphere, because these are the stories that need to be told. Stories about accountability, about service, about what happens when we choose to see each other as human beings instead of obstacles or inconveniences. Leave me a comment and tell me, what would you have done if you were Mayor Brennan? Could you choose justice over your own child? Because that's the question that matters. Justice isn't just what happens in courtrooms. It's the choice every one of us makes when someone we love does something wrong. When we have a chance to stand up for what's right, even when it costs us, choose wisely. Every single time. This is Trial Sphere. I'll see you in the next case. Choose wisely.